people that are secretly running the world?
New World Order.
No, that's what they're looking for. No, the what? Not Masons, that's an organization. This is an English language word. It'll come to me.
Just say it louder.
Establishment?
No, that's the government. Establishment, not quite. No, there's always an establishment. The establishment is usually rarely running things, certainly not behind the scenes. No, I can't get it. We'll get it some other time. Okay, what Washington most feared was factionalism. George Washington, speaking as the mouthpiece for all leading Americans, wanted one thing more than anything else not to happen to the United States and our democracy. George Washington did not want, which word do you think it is?
She thinks it's Illuminati.
That's it!
That's the bonus point.
It's the Illuminati. Yes, the Illuminati, which don't really actually exist and never have, but it's a good word. The Masons do exist. You can go over to their lodge and knock on their door, they will not answer, because they are there. Okay, all right, knock all you want. They don't answer. I don't know who has ever walked up to a Mason's door and knocked on it. Hello? Secret order of the world! Like to buy some encyclopedias. All right, factionalism. Political parties. Our founding fathers desperately wanted one thing to never happen. Political parties to rise up in the United States to fight for power, only care about winning elections, and don't give a damn about our democracy or our nation. Although we used to call them factions, because that's a bad-sounding word, but parties, everyone wants to be invited to one. I love parties, okay, but they're also called factions. They care about winning elections, and they're a very dangerous thing. Our founding fathers didn't want them to be created, tried their best to run this country without them, but quickly discovered that it is inevitable, that people never agree on things, and the simplest thing is for people to break up into two groups. Sometimes even more, but at the least two groups. And when two groups are created in a democracy where you don't have a king, then they organize themselves into organized entities. We call those political parties. It's inevitable. And our nation began in 1788, and we had competing political parties by 1796. In fact, we were very lucky that we had 8 years with George Washington as our president to practice what it's like to have a republic and a democracy before we actually had to have a democracy. America does not become an actual democracy with multi-party elections until 1796, 20 years after our revolution began. You know, there's many countries in the world which, when granted their independence, tried to achieve all of it in a single year with multi-party elections and another president and everything. And most of those countries were in Africa or Latin America, and unsurprisingly, fell flat on their faces. Okay. And unlike America, because we immediately succeeded right off the bat, no, we didn't. We fell on our face a lot as well. And we're also extremely lucky, like having a virtual dictator for 8 years, George Washington, who no one even opposed because he was so incredibly popular. And then President George Washington, who didn't try to impose a lot of new ideas on us, but only a very small number of new ideas. Okay. Because he had a vision of the presidency as being above petty party politics. He wanted to stay out of issues of the day and did not believe that the president should give his opinion on political issues. That would besmirch his reputation. If you've ever seen any paintings of George Washington as president, he's wearing a royal robe that runs down several feet behind him and a crown on his head and holding a scepter. Because the Federalists, like George Washington, believed that if our president was going to be respected, he had to look like respected world leaders, and those were all kings, so he dressed like a king. He saw himself as a 4-year elected monarch. That's how he saw himself and how he acted. He believed that the president should stay out of domestic issues and only get involved in questions of foreign policy and military matters. Well, things have certainly changed since then intensely. Even so, Even more so. So he was, type A personality, type B personality. I don't know about that so much, except when it comes to management. There certainly are type A managers, people who think because they're so smart and energetic that they can and will make every decision themselves. And type B personality managers, delegators, who believe that an administrator's primary responsibility is to do a good job making the appointments underneath you. Like a person who runs a company and feels the most important thing to do is to make the best possible appointments for vice president of marketing and research and development and production. And then they make most of the decisions for the company while you oversee them and administer. Interestingly enough, tendency, Democratic presidents are almost always what type leader?
Type B.
Huh? Name one. Name a famous type B president who was a Democrat and didn't make the decision himself but delegated most of the authority to underlings. Because you can't. Because Democrats all tend to feel themselves as egotistical, at least extremely intelligent men who set themselves up as the leader who makes most of the decisions, like Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton or Obama. You don't think Obama's a delegator, do you? Who was a delegating president who may not have been smart enough to make all of his decisions anyway?
George Washington.
No.
George Bush.
George Bush. Who were the most important names in George Bush? Did George Bush ever give a foreign policy speech without Condoleezza Rice in front of him? Virtually, not just besides him, but didn't he daily start speaking and then just turn over to Condoleezza Rice to keep talking? Because we all know that basically she was in charge of our foreign policy, wasn't she? Along with the Secretary of Defense, Rumsfeld, and Vice President Dick Cheney. All three of them were apparently more powerful than George Bush. As a man who wasn't all that intelligent, he had to be a delegator. Obama is an extremely intelligent man. I believe he makes almost every single one of his decisions himself. And what happens to people who try to make every decision themselves? They tend to fail repeatedly, don't you? Because nobody's perfect. Now, every once in a while, we have an extremely intelligent president who can make strong decisions and is a delegator as well, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, virtually the perfect president. FDR, type A and type B, spectacular appointments, and made strong decisions himself. Okay. What type of a president was Ronald Reagan? Make all decisions himself or delegator?
Delegator.
He was a delegator, very, very, very much so. Okay. Richard Nixon's a little both. How about John Kennedy? Type A, make all decisions himself. You better believe he was that. And Lyndon Johnson, type A squared. Lyndon Johnson, in fact, destroyed his presidency because he wouldn't listen to anybody else's advice. Okay, so those are the types of presidents, and we're running through those. There's type A presidents, type B presidents, liberal presidents, conservative presidents, successful presidents, failed presidents. Those are the three. You can be a type A, conservative, successful president, or a type B, liberal, failed president, or any of the other varieties. But those are the three, because no matter what you try to do as president, if you don't accomplish it, you're a failure. So you can be a failed liberal president, you can be a failed conservative president. Was Ronald Reagan a successful conservative president? Did liberals hate his guts? Even more so because of his successes. Now let's name a successful liberal president. You've got to go back pretty far. Franklin Roosevelt. And Republicans especially hated him. They couldn't stand him because he was so successful. They hated him, wouldn't even pronounce his name correctly. How do they pronounce Roosevelt's name? The Republicans. Roosevelt. Yes, Roosevelt. To insult him.
What about Teddy Roosevelt?
Even farther back. A type A, liberal, Republican, successful president. Very interesting. And of course, my favorite president by far, of course. All right. Okay. So his appointments were very important. Now, I want you to know that at that original time, I don't want to go into how we appointed our vice president because we changed the Constitution a number of times and tried everything humanly imaginable that you could try to appoint a vice president. And this is not a graduate school class, so we'll just ignore them until they ever show up as being important. But for the first vice president, there is an important principle I want to mention. Why John Adams needed to be the vice president of the United States. Because he was the most respected and famous Yankee. By which I mean a New Englander. or someone from New York. From now on, I will be using the term Yankee to mean a northerner, and I will use the word southerner to mean a southerner. Using my sense of humor, we don't have a word for southerner, except we do have one, except it's an insulting term. We don't use it as much anymore. It now just means a dummy. Goober. Goober! A dumb southern hick. It doesn't mean it anymore. It doesn't mean that anymore. It hasn't been it for a very long time. Basically, southerners have just been called southerners. Or, whatever. Any insulting word you can stick in there. Okay, and then for the north, it's Yankee. Although if you're overseas, Yankee means any American, doesn't it? Okay, so it has two meanings. All right. George Washington may be the most respected person in America, but he is from the South. Undeniably, he's a southerner. And so Yankees are going to need some representation in the government. So make the vice president from Boston, from Massachusetts. And you've got a geographically balanced ticket, as it were. All right. The Secretary of State is a very important position. In every other part of the country, they would call him the foreign minister. The Secretary of State is in charge. He's our chief diplomat, chief negotiator, the president's chief diplomat. And our first Secretary of State was Thomas Jefferson. The obvious choice. He had been overseas negotiating for America during the Revolution. The French knew who he was. The English knew who he was. It's the perfect choice. And he's going to be the liberal voice in the administration. I'm taking that back because we should not use words like liberal. There were no liberals yet. Okay. For whatever that word means, we should not use it yet. So I'm taking it back. He represented one pole of position on the issues. He was the one of the two men who had the president's ear, and whatever advice he gave him, you could promise it was the opposite of Alexander Hamilton's advice, whom we can call a conservative. Whatever you're going to call Thomas Jefferson. In fact, we should probably call him a libertarian. Thomas Jefferson, the libertarian position, supporting small government, only small government, and the government should stay out of things. And Alexander Hamilton, who believed the government should take actions, although we would certainly call them conservative actions.
Did he have a cabinet position?
And indeed, Alexander Hamilton had the other most important position of the Secretary heads, Secretary of Treasury, who is our chief financial officer. In other countries like England, they call the chief financial officer the prime minister. And other countries have a financial minister. The British don't have a financial minister. The prime minister is the finance minister. The finance minister is the person in charge of spending the country's money. That no matter how much, whatever the Congress decides to appropriate, the president okays the spending of that money, the Secretary of Treasury then allocates it. So, of course, he's an extremely powerful and important position. We didn't have as many secretaries as we do today, and many of our modern positions, like, as you might expect, Secretary of Commerce or Housing and Urban Development, are more modern creations.
Homeland Security?
Homeland Security being just the most recent example.
Yeah.
But we did have a position called the Secretary of War, which today we call the Secretary of Defense, because nowadays in America we never attack anyone, we only defend. There, more Joe humor. We used to call things what they were. The Secretary of War was the Secretary of War, but that sounded too naughty, so we called him the Secretary of Defense. Boom, 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 defense. Okay, there you go. This is the modern world where you have to be very careful with any word that you choose, because you're going to hurt people's feelings no matter what you do. Our first Secretary of War was John Knox, a hero of the Revolution. The Supreme Court's important. Who appoints justices to the Supreme Court?
President.
So who appointed all 9 of our first Supreme Court justices? President Washington appointed all 9 of the first, and they were all conservative Federalist judges, all of whom opposing the egalitarian ideas of men like Thomas Jefferson or James Madison. That's excessive. but who loved the ideas of Alexander Hamilton, the ultimate Federalist. George Washington is the symbol of the most honorable and decent Federalist, but Alexander Hamilton invented every idea the Federalist Party ever came up with. It was Alexander Hamilton's. And Thomas Jefferson was the original Republican Party. You wanted to find out what the original Republicans believed, then you asked Thomas Jefferson a question, because everyone else was just aping his positions. That's what the Federalists said to attack the Democrats. You're nothing but a bunch of Thomas Jefferson lovers. Okay, that he is too powerful. He's too important in that party. It's just his mouthpiece, is what people said at first, the Democratic Republican Party. By the way, that's what we call the party Thomas Jefferson is going to found. We can't call them the Republicans, because that's going to confuse the hell out of everybody, isn't it? So we call them the Democratic Republicans. The party that was calling itself the Republicans at the time, which we call the Democrats today, is we call them the Democratic Republicans. And that's what the book calls them, the Democratic Republicans. Does anyone know the president who decided to change the name of the Republicans to the Democrats? That's a good question. And of course you'll learn that in chapter 10. Andrew Jackson, the second most powerful, the second incredibly powerful, important Democrat who, whatever Jackson said, was the position the Democrats had. Andrew Jackson, an extremely powerful American president whom I cannot stand. Okay, as a rat bastard. Okay, also tens of thousands of Americans are related to him. His family got around.
To who?
To Andrew Jackson. Meanwhile, no one on earth is related to Abraham Lincoln.
We're related to the Adamses.
You are related to the Adamses, and you look a little bit like them.
What?
Do I have to put a picture on there to show that you have a relatively small, round face like the Adams all had? Little heads on big necks. That's the Adams. Thank God I'm like Andrew Jackson, the man with the largest skull in human history. Take a look at the $20 bill someday and stop thinking of him as a hero. And look at that Frankenstein forehead. It goes up to here. He's a monster, a freak. Like Abraham Lincoln, possibly the ugliest man to ever live. So horrific. Have you seen any photographs of him? Look close. Don't think national hero. Then look at that face. Yes.
Didn't they think he had like some sort of...
Well, he had... there wasn't very good medicine for acne back then. Except like dirt. They recommended packing your face with dirt. You know what I mean? A lot of people ended up with horribly pockmarked faces by the time they were adults. Okay, that was very, very, very common. The least of your troubles in the old days, getting acne and ending with a pock-marked face. How about all the diseases that kill you by the time you're 27? Okay, all right. So, who appoints the Chief Justice? Here's another question that lots of people get wrong. This is not fair. Who appoints the Chief Justice? Because I think I've asked it wrong.
Thought the president did.
Not the president. No, the president tells the nine justices who their boss is going to be among those 9. What if they don't like that person?
Why did John Roberts get pulled back?
Who picks the 9? Who picks you have a vote. There are 9 votes. Now you get it, do you? There are 9 votes. Who picks the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court?
Themselves.
That's right. They pick. They vote. Whoever gets 5 votes, whoever gets 4 votes plus his vote, I hope he votes for himself, gets to be the Chief Justice. By definition, we now know that however he votes, will go the majority, because that's the reason they picked him. Because he has their politics. Okay. Very good. And how do you lose being a Chief Justice? If 5 of them don't want you to be one anymore, then you're not. It's a government of 9. Okay, majority rule. Huh?
Do they appoint a new one?
Whenever they realize the person doesn't have the support of 4 other justices anymore. So far, all the justices Obama has appointed were already liberal justices being replaced by another liberal justice. What needs to happen is for Obama to stay in office long enough for one of the conservative judges who will try to cheat death itself to outlast him. Since Obama became the first president ever to insult the Supreme Court during his State of the Union address last year, in their face with them looking right at him, when everyone knows the Supreme Court's not allowed to defend themselves, but just has to stand there. As a result, most of the justices will not be there for Obama's next State of the Union address. There'll be empty seats. His biggest mistake so far as president, I think. Just a gigantic faux pas. Embarrassing mistake. You don't attack the Supreme Court. Oh well. And the first Chief Justice was John Jay. Other important positions, the Attorney General. I don't know who the first Attorney General was. But Attorney General is an important position appointed by the President. He's our Chief Law Enforcement Officer. In general, he's the President's attorney. That's why he's called the Attorney General. Okay. In general, he takes care of all legal matters for the President. And back then, an extremely important position was the Postmaster General, which today isn't even a cabinet post. But back then, the mails were the only communication system available. And the only thing tying our 13 separate states together was the mail. So the mail was the federal government's best way of holding our country together. And as a result, President Washington appointed George Washington as the Postmaster. George Washington appointed Benjamin Franklin as our symbolic first Postmaster General, even though everyone knew he only had a few months to live, and he died a few months later, about 88 years old. Okay, so Ben Franklin is finally out of the picture, really, really old and dead. Okay, no more funny stories. President's got one overwhelming issue to deal with. More important than any of the others, the war debt, the festering, decade-old war debt. Debts owed to American bankers, to foreign bankers. Money we owe the veterans who fought in the Continental Army for many years but never got their pay. Hundreds of thousands of them. Money owed to businessmen and farmers who had their crops and material requisitioned by the government with the IOU signed by George Washington. They all want their money back, and there is no money. Now, during the Confederation Congress, we tried to pay everyone back by printing up huge amounts of totally worthless paper money, not even backed by wooden nickels, much less silver and gold, and instantly nobody accepted them as currency. Certainly not American banks, and absolutely certainly not foreign banks, who said, this is worthless paper, you send us gold and silver coins, stamped with I don't care what. But they have to be made out of gold or silver, or you haven't paid back your loans. We don't trust your useless paper currency.
What about the loyalists who lost their property?
Ah, very good. Let's talk about all those loyalists. Because he already gave some of it away. Who are honest and decent people. When the war is over, we let bygones be bygones, and we let those loyalists stay here in America. True or false? It would be nice. No, we kicked them out, confiscated all their property and wealth, and they became the majority of the English-speaking Canadians who live there today. Another reason why the Canadians don't want to be Americans, their ancestors lived here, we kicked them out. Most of them moved to Acadia. Okay, to replace the French Cajuns who'd moved down to Louisiana. And many of them live in places like New Brunswick and those areas
Did we
today.
compensate them for
No, of course not. We took their stuff and greedily seized it.
Did we say we would or what?
Huh?
Did we say that we would?
I don't know. You pushed me beyond. Just like, of course, and in the end, we did finally confiscate the Japanese Americans we put in concentration camps in World War II 45 years later. By which time there were very few Japanese Americans left alive, and they were all in their 70s. We did that in the 1990s. So we've improved. Okay. All right. But I'm glad you mentioned that. So George Washington, Alexander Hamilton was George Washington's right-hand man before the presidency. When George Washington was our commander of the Continental Army, Alexander Hamilton was George Washington's personal or private secretary. Now those phrases, personal secretary and private secretary, are the same thing, are they not? They're just two different meanings. We all know that a personal secretary can be almost any position imaginable. Anything from the second most important position in a major worldwide corporation to a bimbo who answers the phone. Can be personal secretary. It can be anything in between there. Personal secretary can have whatever power the authoritarian position which to give to their personal secretary, including often being the person who decides who gets to talk to or communicate with the person in power. And we all know that the person who controls communication actually controls. And Alexander Hamilton was a very important position. He was one of these people, right up until the Revolution, there were still people coming to America from England. or from previous. As a matter of fact, Alexander Hamilton's parents were English. They moved to a Caribbean island where they lived for a few years while Alexander Hamilton was born, and then before he was a few years old, his family had moved to New York. So I say he's an American. Okay. What an American is a relatively tenuous. It has flow. People say Obama shouldn't be president because he wasn't born in the United States, even though he was born in Hawaii. Did his parents move very quickly from Hawaii? So he was only lived there for what? A few weeks or months. But where he was born, Who ran against Obama for president?
John McCain.
McCain was born in Panama. Well, in the Panama Canal Zone, which was still American territory because his parents were Army parents, and so they were traveling around the country on military bases. Would you like to be not an American citizen if your parents were serving in the military when you were born? So there's the idea. What an American is a more wide-ranging feel for it than most other countries in the world, and it's always been that way.
Hasn't Obama's birth certificate never been released?
Why should he have to?
Because there's questions of whether...
There's no law that says that you have to release your birth certificate. No other man who's ever run for president of the United States has released his birth certificate to the media.
They've proved that, but some people question that he was even born in Hawaii. That's why.
Even if he wasn't, I would still say he's a legitimately elected president of the United States. You could be a citizen of the United States if you're an immigrant just being here for 5 or 6 years. Can't you? Legal immigrant, 5 or 6 years later, you're a citizen of the United States. It's just mean-spiritedness. Yes?
But when you born here, though,
Yeah, you do.
That's correct. The only position in the United States you have to be born here. But his parents, his mother was an American citizen. So let's just leave it at that. I'm going to leave that at that and move on. Well, so when Washington needed to solve a problem, he turned the problem over to Alexander Hamilton. And Hamilton was instructed by Washington to create a plan to deal with this long-festering war debt problem. And Hamilton turned out to be a master genius at financial affairs. He was our first great economic planner in a country that's basically had only 2. Okay, if many. We've had very few master planners, economic planners in this country, and Alexander Hamilton was such a man. That's a reason why he was the most famous Secretary of Treasury by far, and we have had very few famous Secretary of Treasuries. In many ways, Obama's Secretary of Treasury was, for a brief moment last year, the second most famous Secretary of Treasury in America when we were giving all that money to the banks like there was no tomorrow. What was his name? He was on television all the time. Geithner. He's faded recently, hasn't he? Because he's unpopular. He's blamed for giving the banks $1 trillion. Okay, because he gave the banks $1 trillion. All right.
Welcome with Paulson.
Now that's who started it. And he's not Secretary of Treasury. Isn't he the... That's the Bush administration, yeah. That's right. They both gave massive amounts of money to the banks. Of course. All right. And so Hamilton designed a series of economic policies which both put our federal government in very sound financial position, squared us off, and also stimulated economic growth for decades to come. And basically created the foundation for the American economic miracle that has lasted over 200 years now. He wanted to do so many things that he couldn't just introduce a single law. That if he wanted to introduce his ideas one law at a time, there'd be so many laws he would have overwhelmed the Congress. Which, after all, was also trying to work on that Bill of Rights, which, by the way, it took them 2 years to pass. The Bill of Rights had not become law until 1791. I don't think I remember to mention it, but originally there were 200 ideas that were whittled down to 10. So it took a long time to create it. And so what Hamilton did is call his ideas reports. Every year from 1790 to 1792, he gave the Congress a single massive report. Within each report were all sorts of changes and laws and new ideas and new institutions, all being introduced at the same time. Then he used every single political skill imaginable to get the first 2 of these 3 programs passed. Ramrodding, being sweet and lovely, giving presents, pressuring everything. That's the important thing you need to know about politics. You have to always be giving people presents and then punching them in the face. And the presents and the punching forces people to bend to your will. If it's just presents and niceness, they'll take advantage of you. If it's just punches in the face, they'll come to hate you. You need to use both. That's called, what's it called? A velvet glove, sometimes. Or what? Carrot and stick approach. You put the stick in front, you put a carrot on a stick in front of the mule to get him going, and if he doesn't get going, use the stick to whack him on the ass until he gets going. Then you put the carrot back in front of his face. Okay, that's what we need for immigration reform. We need to be generous to those who are already here, and then make it so we don't get any more illegal immigrants. We need a carrot and stick approach, because the stick will never be accepted by the Democrats, and the carrot alone will never be accepted by the Republicans. You'll need both, a carrot and stick approach.
That's pretty good.
What did Teddy Roosevelt said? I speak softly, but carry a big stick. Okay. Yes. So we are only going to study the two that passed: the report on national credit, which is on the study guide, and the report on a national bank. The report on a national credit was passed in 1790, authorizing the issuing of government bonds. Now I'm going to explain it for 10 minutes. But that's the basis. Report on national credit, government bonds. And then in 1791, the report on a national bank. That created the Bank of the United States. I also spent 10 minutes talking about it, but there you go. The third one is, I don't even remember anymore, report on commerce and industry. And it was so far-sighted and so many decades ahead of its time, talking about a future when America would be a basically commercial and industrial nation, when we would remain a farm-based nation for almost 100 years. But the Congress basically just scratched their head and said, this sounds brilliant, but we don't understand any of it. And they did not pass it. Start maintaining a principle that I will maintain throughout my entire 2 semesters of U.S. history. If the Congress does not pass it, it is not important, because it did not become law. Many his professors love to cause you to waste precious study time studying proposals that never became law, like Bill Clinton's health care plan. It wasn't passed, so who cares what it was? Obama's health care plan was passed. In the future, you'll have to study it. Okay. All right, moving along.
Where did you say the report on national credit was?
Well, we're about to find out that it authorized the issuance of government bonds. And obviously, I will need to explain what a bond is. And I'll do it from an historical perspective, by explaining it from the perspective of what's going on. What's going on is that from a traditional, old-fashioned point of view, I'll bet that you think that if you have a debt, the best thing for you to do is to pay it off, to balance your budget. Except that is rather simplistic farm boy thinking, said Alexander Hamilton, our world's first fancy, smancy, expensive suit, slick back hair, East Coast banker type. He's far more sophisticated than that. Why don't you should just float your debt. You should float your credit card debt. If you try to pay it off, you'll spend every penny for your whole life trying to pay off your credit card debt. If you just pay the minimum, what will happen? If you just pay the minimum on your credit card that they're asking for every month, what will happen soon, sir? Eventually?
Keep going.
Yeah, you'll be destroyed financially. Thank you very much. Eventually, you'll have tens of thousands of dollars of debt. You need to pay the minimum plus the accumulated interest. You pay the accumulated interest they put on your credit card for that much, how much they're charging you on interest, plus the minimum, and your credit card debt will not go out of control.
You go into bankruptcy.
Huh?
You can go into bankruptcy.
If you don't do what I just said, yes, and you can go into bankruptcy. Financially ruined. That's what happens when you're financially ruined. You go into bankruptcy, which used to be okay, but they changed the laws when the Republicans were in power, and now it stinks. Real bad. But thankfully, we have Homestead here in Texas, so you get to keep your house. Yeah, we have Homestead. That debt is a bad thing. But debt, all modern advanced institutions, whether they are governments or large corporations, None of them think debt is a bad thing. They all use debt to create further revenue and wealth for themselves. Alexander Hamilton, as an advanced financial thinker, realized that debt can be used to create wealth. But the worst thing in the world to do for a government to pay off its debt is to raise taxes until the debt is paid. Because first you've got a bad thing, then you try to deal with it with a second bad thing, raising taxes, so now you've hurt the people twice. The debt hurts the people, the raising of the taxes hurt the people. There are much better and more progressive ways to handle it. He wanted to sell our debt, break the debt up into pieces, and then sell it to wealthy investors. When you buy a piece of a government's debt or a corporation's debt, you are buying a blank, a bond. That's what bonds are. You are giving, or better off, loaning money to a government entity or a corporate entity to help them balance their books or budget, and in return for that lovely gift of free money, they will pay you back after a considerable period of time has gone by with interest compounded annually. The longer period of time you are willing to give the government or the business entity that loan, say 20 or 30 years, the higher the interest rate they offer you. And when interest rate is compounded annually, it eventually turns into a very large amount of money. Reminding you once again that if you have 10% interest the first time, you get it from $1, you get $1.10. The second time, it's not $1.20, is it? It's $1.21 and a half. And then each time that increases. Okay, until eventually you get a massive amount of money. They used to tell you in the old days when banks would offer 5%, Mr. Charles, you can remember that, can't you? When banks offered 5.25%. Oh, wow, those were the good old days. Got people's savings account now give you 0.5% if you're lucky.
Yeah.
Less than that most of the time, maybe 0.2. Pathetic. In the old days,
About credit.
when you could get 5% interest on a bank, they would tell you that if you put $50 a week, no, $5 a week in the bank when you were 20 years old, when you're 60 years old, you'd have $5 or $10 million in the bank because of compounded interest. Okay. Well, that's the old days. Oh well. Now you'd get what? You'd have the same $5. They don't give you any interest. All right. Anyway. So selling the debt will make a bad thing, the debt, a good thing by selling it to wealthy investors and then paying them back for that in future decades. Now, we won't have to worry about the problem of paying that money back plus interest because we'll issue more debt, more bonds in those future decades to cover the past bonds. And you just continue issuing bonds for centuries. Well, by now we've issued massive, unbelievable quantities. But it worked for a couple hundred years. That's pretty good. Okay. Not only will that then allow the government a new source of revenue. Now the government will raise revenue not just from selling land out west, but also by selling its debt itself. Then that money can be used to cover government expenses. So we don't have to raise taxes. Because the government already did pass a tariff. Once we did get our Congress, in which laws require just a majority vote, the very first thing that Congress did is pass a 5% tariff on foreign goods. It was called the Tariff and Tonnage Act. And by and large, simplifying it as much as humanly possible, it was a 5% tax. But like a lot of taxes back then, can you guys realize that back in the old days you could not expect the merchant to collect a tax from the consumers on every individual sale? That this is 1790 we're talking about, you understand what I'm saying? That if you made merchants pay the tax, they would have to pay it value added at the beginning when it was in bulk. The merchant would pay a large tax to the government and then just charge more to the consumer. Okay, that's the way taxes used to be, and the way they still are in many countries around the world. Whereas we Americans, we want to know where every penny of tax goes, don't we? That's why, you know, you buy something that costs 99-cent candy bar, how much does the candy bar really cost? $1.07, then you know it's 8 cents tax. How much would it cost in Europe? $1.07. That would be the price. You wouldn't, actually it would be like $5. You wouldn't know that $4 of that was tax. Okay, you would just, if you go to Mexico, or if you go anywhere in Europe, they've already added, you just get a price, you don't know what the tax is. That way you don't find out that it's 200 to 300%. Okay, very good. I don't know about that in Mexico. Do they do that in Mexico? Do they give you the tax separate or just the price? Tax separate?
No, they put the tax.
Into the price?
Yes.
Well, that would be the continental European style. Yeah. This is a very American. No, we want to see exactly so I can gripe about it. 8 cents! Riot! Yes. Strike, strike, strike! Okay, you know, like the French, they're up in arms, burning the whole country down because they're going to raise the retirement age to 62. From 60, those lazy bastards. I've known a number of French people, and every single French person who's ever moved to America, they all say one thing. The French, they don't like to work. That's why I moved to America. They don't like to work. So any hard-working French person has migrated to America long ago. There's no genetic French people left who have hard work. Every single gene in France that had hard work moved to another country. Okay.
They're probably going to do the same thing here with Social Security. They're probably, I mean...
Because I've known many French-speaking people in America. They are all hard-working people. Hard-working. Michael is really a hard-working guy. And totally French. I can't believe it. It's the hardest-working, nicest French person, French family you'll ever meet in your life. Breaking every stereotype. Now, there you go. That's what good stereotypes are good for. But that could be why he's here in the United States. They go back to France every summer. All right. Good. And then once the wealthy, the elites, have invested significant portions of their wealth in America, they will not let our country fail. The most elitist and conservative of all ideas. You want your country to thrive, tie its interests to the rich. Rich people want to stay rich. When the rich know that their interest is tied to the success of their country, they will make sure that country succeeds. Do the wealthy in Afghanistan need a stable government in Afghanistan to succeed? No, they don't. They've learned perfectly well through the drug trade how to become filthy rich with a collapsed government. If we could find a way to convince the wealthy people of Afghanistan that a stable government is in their own interest, then it would become stable very quickly. Very quickly. And so would many of the... China is an extremely stable country because the communism tied the interest of their country to the wealthy very effectively.
They own our bonds.
They own massive quantities of our bonds. That's correct.
And they will never be paid off.
Oh no, we will pay it off. I promise you, we will pay every penny to China because we desperately need them to keep buying.
They want us to keep going because they have our bonds.
Yeah, not only that, but it's actually a pretty stable relationship. They buy our bonds, so we buy their stuff. They stop buying our bonds, our country collapses. We stop buying their stuff, their country
We
collapses.
have a partnership.
It's a kind of a partnership like two people who are chained together in a chain gang who don't like each other. They're going to get away, they're going to have to run like this the whole time. Okay, that's unfortunately exactly how we are, because they are communists. They hate our guts. I'm not kidding. Communism is dedicated to the destruction of the United States, and they're still communists. But there you go. Not very good communists, are they? All right. So that's a very elitist, federalist idea. For a country to survive, you tie its interests to the rich. If the rich own our bonds, they will not let America fail, because then they won't get their money plus interest. What could be more conservative? And today, what could be more Republican? Ronald Reagan Republican. Okay. All right. But no one claims the Federalists to be their ancestors, because we're about to see the Federalists were a bunch of elitist bastards, SOBs, and Americans don't like elitist SOB bastards who think they're so smart, think they're so great. Voters don't like people like that. We can't stand them. We like regular people who come across like you and me. Thomas Jefferson types, Andrew Jackson types with a nice smile and a handshake, and a firm handshake. Okay. I once met one of the Democrats who used to be a congressman in Texas in our district who got defeated a while back, and he was here in Brookhaven 5 or 6 years ago. And I liked the guy, and I put my hand out and I shook it. It was like soft Jell-O. As much as I squeezed, it just kept getting softer. I pulled it away. Ah! And I immediately talked to one of our guys here, who's a Democrat too, and he said, yeah, everybody says that. Unfortunate. It's like he literally was a soft Democrat. Literally, physically soft. It's like, all my stereotypes confirmed. Oh my God. You know? Yeah. Meanwhile, you walk up to a Republican. We know the Republican handshake, don't you? Let me give this gentleman a Republican handshake. 1, 2. No, otherwise gay. You did 3? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Put away. Now I'm going to do the Democratic handshake. How are you doing? Sure, you're a great man. I'm telling you, you're a wonderful man. A wonderful man. I'm telling you, he's a really good guy. Wonderful man, wonderful man. And you pull it back. You got to go all the way to the shoulder. Bill Clinton brings you around to that big arm. He's got that. Eventually, he's got that hand on the other shoulder, over here, talking into your ear. You know. Democrat. Now we know. Republicans, they won't. They're not confident in their sexuality. I don't think so. Okay. All right.
Right.
Okay. So. Now, how are we going to get this passed through Congress? Because just because it's a good idea is not good enough. If the only reason you have to get something passed through Congress is a good idea, and you don't butter it up with something like a present for the Congress, a gift to get congressmen to vote for it, they will not vote for it. Like the immigration reform of 2006. There was only one reason to vote for it. It was an excellent idea and the country needed it. Desperately in need of immigration reform. But the Democrats didn't want to give the Republicans any gifts right before they were going to take power. So they crushed the bill, which they were actually in favor of. And now 4 years later, nothing. In this case, Alexander Hamilton is smart enough to know that you've got to butter the bread. Sometimes you've got to cover it with frosting. You see, the problem was that the 7 northern states had massive debts. No, actually, I said a problem. That's a wonderful thing. The 7 northern states had massive debts of their own. So Alexander Hamilton said the federal government will assume them. No states have any money. None of you have to worry about raising taxes or Shays' rebellions. Your debt problems are over. The federal government will assume your debt. It's now our responsibility for a bigger pile of debt to issue more bonds to make more money from. We don't want the debt to get smaller. We want it to get bigger so we can make more money with it. Like internet companies who this very day make almost all their money off of selling stocks and bonds, and that's where the vast majority of profits come from, plus they make some money selling a product. But we all know the future's in computers, and so relentlessly we invest and we buy bonds and stocks in software companies, in internet companies, in hardware producing companies. And that's where they make a very large portion of their money. What could be nicer than selling a stock? When you buy a company stock, what do you get other than a piece of paper? You get nothing. You just gave that company money, didn't you? Ka-ching! And you return nothing except the right to sell that to somebody else for more money if they're dumb enough or smart enough to buy it for more money. Then you take your profit, don't you? Yeah. Okay. That shows you how much I know about finance. Something must be wrong. I'm not quite right, but I'm very, very plausible. Okay. All right. So the 7 northern states said, hooray! Because when it comes to being a congressman, you are up for re-election every 2 years, and you have to tell your district what you did for them. Not what you did for America, but what you did for your district alone. How much money did you bring me? How many jobs did you give my district? You better not have sacrificed your district's economic prosperity for the good of the nation overall, or your district's going to get a new representative. You also sacrificed your own political career. Okay. And so Hamilton has given the 7 northern states a reason to vote for it. The states no longer have a massive debt hovering over their head. But what about the 5 or 6 southern states? They already balanced their budgets. They already paid off their war debt. They're not going to vote for it. And so Hamilton decides to offer them something that has nothing to do with finance at all. You know, Congress can do anything they want. Can Congress pass any law that feels like even a stupid one, you have to wear your underwear on your head? Can Congress pass that law?
Yes.
Because they're our government, they can pass any damn law they want. They're our government. They can even break the law. They make the laws. Okay, can you sue a congressman for sexual harassment? No, you cannot. Of course not. They made the sexual harassment laws, and they put inside those laws that they are exempt themselves. Okay. Congressmen are exempt from sexual harassment lawsuits. They are the only people on earth exempt from sexual harassment lawsuits. You cannot sue a member of Congress for sexual harassment.
What? How is it?
Wow.
Did you want that law to be passed in the first place? That was the deal you had to accept to get that law passed, or it wasn't going to get passed, because they're all a bunch of harassers. Some of them are straight, some of them are gay. But they're all harassers. They are extremely powerful people, and extremely powerful people expect you to have sex with them when they ask you to have sex with them. Okay? And they can make your career go like this if you do, and if you don't, it goes just like that. Now, they'll say that's not why your career was destroyed, but your career got destroyed. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that either. Oh, dear. Just bad thing to say. Moving along, Alexander Hamilton would never have done that. He was a good guy. Thomas Jefferson would. And did. Okay. All right, moving along. So, by this time, we were already decided we would build a brand new capital for the United States on new land, somewhere, but what state? We decided to put it in the South. Washington, D.C. was built between the southern states of Maryland and Virginia on the Potomac River on an open space there outside of Baltimore, because those were two southern states in approximately the middle of the country. And it was a deal cut with Alexander Hamilton, and as a present to offer the Southerners, we voted for the report on national credit. It didn't really get us any money, but we got the nation's capital, and the respect that that would have with it, it got passed. And that's how you get things passed in government, by adding things to a bill until you get a majority of congressmen to vote for it. And it might have to be something completely unrelated. You have to have no shame. You want to be in politics and leadership, you got to have no shame to get things done. You got any shame at all, you might fail. Okay. And that healthcare reform of Obama had hundreds of different things in it by the end, didn't it? Just this massive, huge piece of legislation to get it passed. Okay. We have no time, do we? This class is over for today, isn't it? All right, so it wasn't the best class again. If you haven't noticed, I never get off to a jackrabbit start. I'll speed up on Thursday. I'll speed up and be finished with number 2. If I'm not finished with number 2 on Thursday, I'm finished with it anyway. Okay, we will be finished with number 2 by the end of Thursday's class. Yes, let me count you as present instead of absent. Come on over here. I've got to...
End of class session.